National Signing Day, obviously, where we kick it off. We've got so much to talk about. Here's what I'm not going to do because I see it all the time and I drown in numbers when people throw too many numbers at me. And so the numbers are the numbers. We got to make them relatable. What do they mean? So I could throw out all these different stats that tell you how historic Alabama's signing class is. It's the highest rated class of all time. It's the highest player rating on average in the entire country. But that, to you, I don't really think drives the point home as much as the stat I'm about to give you. So I'm perusing the Alabama message board, BamaOnline.com, really good site for Alabama fans, and the message board over there, I think it's the round table. I saw this stat, so I can't take credit for it, although it is public knowledge. Let me pull up my trusty notebook pad here. Here's all you really need to know about how dominant this class was. The Alabama average player rating, take all their commitments, the average player rating is 95. There are only 110 players in America rated 95 or higher. Their average signee is rated 95. So now I'm putting the trusty notebook pad down because I really don't think I need to read all the other numbers. That's out of this world. That is, video game type stuff. That's cheat code type stuff. You could go through their class and I could pick out like 15 different guys that would be the absolute crown jewel of many other signing classes. And so I think obviously noteworthy is the wide receiver signing class. We're going to talk to Nick Saban about this later in the show. We've got him exclusive with us. And so the wide receivers, I'll save that. You can listen to him. But man, JoJo Earl, out of many other names, is a name that I love in that group. I just think it's insane, what they're doing on the offensive line. There were 2 offensive linemen rated in the top 5 in the overall player ratings this year. They were both offensive tackles. J.C. Latham was number 1. Tommy Brockermeyer was number 2, and Bama got them both. And neither one was from the state of Alabama. So they're an absolute national recruiting machine at this point. And a lot of people have broken down that class. We've got plenty of time to talk about it. It's just a complete and total machine. It's incredible to watch. And talking to some people last night and sort of putting out some feelers leading up to signing day, I think you'd be kind of surprised at some of the folks who may have wanted into that class that they simply didn't have room for. I also think you may be surprised at guys who were in that class that they recruited, but they certainly didn't go into it in full-out knife fight mode. It's like we'd like for him to commit. If he doesn't commit, that's not the end of the world. We have other options there. And that would probably amaze you if you're just an onlooker. It would depress you maybe if you're a rival fan, but that's what Nick Saban has going at Alabama right now. But outside of the number 1 class there with Alabama, in no particular order here, just some other things that caught my eye. I went into yesterday already pretty impressed with what Oregon had done. I think right now, like I said on the show, because of the Pac-12 sticker, the Pac-12 logo on the helmet, I think a lot of folks may overlook them. They may overlook Southern Cal. This time last year, we were way down on Southern Cal because they were way down in the rankings, and I'm going to talk about the Trojans in just a second. But as for Oregon, man, like they're sitting there at number 6 overall. I think they went into the day number 6 yesterday. They did nothing to disappoint. They landed Avante Dickerson, and so they're at number 6. But I want you to think about this. So it's not just where the class is rated. Someone's going to be number 6 every year, and 5 and 7. So what you need at Oregon, I think, is you need bona fide star quarterback play. And I think a lot of folks, when I say that, they think to themselves, what about Marcus Mariota? Yes, but that's in another generation. That was another coaching staff. So then in this world, in this coaching staff with Mario Cristobal in there, then the next thing that comes to people's minds is, well, we recently had Justin Herbert here. That's true. But think about the Herbert Oregon version versus the Herbert NFL version. When he was at Oregon, he was a good player. He was a very good player. But it was always, you're looking at a mock draft, you see Justin Herbert in the top 5, and it's much more on projection and tools than proven college production. They haven't had a guy recently who's done it there. And that's where Ty Thompson enters the equation. That's a guy who is a high 4-star quarterback out of Arizona. And I've talked to some people who, hey, they would easily rate him 5 stars. Like they think he may be the most underrated player in the class, especially at a premier position. And so the reason I bring him up is because when you look at all the other supporting cast members that they're bringing in, they're doing a really good job. They go coast to coast. They have to. There is virtually no in-state talent any given year in the state of Oregon. You certainly can't do there what Mac Brown did at North Carolina and just hang out in your backyard all day and just kind of yell over your fence, hey, you want to come play here? Because it works in North Carolina. That was a loaded in-state class this year. But as for Oregon, they go all over the place. And so they go to Arizona. They get Ty Thompson. If he comes in and he is their version of what Deshaun Watson did to Clemson, if he's their version of what Tua ended up doing at Alabama, I mean revolutionizing the quarterback position, You've seen what's happened at those places since then. It's a conveyor belt of elite wide receiver talent. Think about right now, for instance, an Xavier Worthy who comes from the West Coast and of all places ends up at Michigan, but leaves the West Coast is the theme I want to talk about there. If they can keep elite perimeter skill West Coast talent on the West Coast and make Oregon the destination, they become a national championship contender. That's absolutely going to happen. It's going to be predicated on whether Ty Thompson lives up to the billing. If he does, this was a big day for Oregon because this isn't the first elite class they've had. Like, they're stacking classes on top of each other. So that's a program to be excited about. It's a really good thing for the Pac-12 and probably even a good thing for Oregon that Southern Cal ended up rated as high as they were, because that's a program I think a lot of us have had serious questions about. I mean, after last year, they finished as low as they did, and it wasn't because a coaching staff got fired. Like, Clay Helton has been the head coach here the whole time. Well, they brought in, the quarterback position. They got guys like Miller Moss, but the really important part here is the number one player overall in the country was Corey Foreman, and they kept him home. And that was a guy who was linked at any given time to Clemson. He had been committed to him previously, Georgia, LSU. It looked like that was going to be another case of an elite West Coast guy leaving the West Coast. Well, he ends up staying home. And so they got a couple of quarterbacks. I mentioned Moss, Jackson Dart. They've got him in there, but they kept a lot of guys home. They are a top 10 class. Very good thing. So Pac-12 football, not dead quite yet. But let me talk about Michigan. So I said Xavier Worthy's name a second ago. Xavier Worthy is one of three players I'm extremely excited about with Michigan. You got to always phrase this and frame it against the backdrop of where the program's at right now. Xavier Worthy is an elite wide receiver, high four-star receiver. You can choose whether you want to call him very good or elite. He's got burner speed. That's what they've lacked, to be honest with you, on both sides of the ball. But they've lacked it at the perimeter, skilled positions, and they've lacked elite presence at running back and quarterback to go along with all that. Obviously, it all works off the quarterback position. So J.J. McCarthy could be one of the very most important players in this entire recruiting cycle. He is a five-star quarterback coming to Michigan. And unlike the Shea Patterson experimentation, I actually think this one's going to play out very well for Michigan. Let's hope it does. So let's assume it does for a second. J.J. McCarthy comes in. He's got all the intangibles you want. He's obviously got the physical traits you want. And he ends up being the guy that takes the job as a true freshman. Let's just say for a second he takes the job. Well, Josh Gaddis certainly hopes that's the way it plays out, because that would mean Josh Gaddis and Michigan hit a home run on the offensive recruiting side, but also he's got his guy now. And he's got the guy that other players like Edwards and like Xavier Worthy came to Michigan to play with. And then all of a sudden, you look at some of the speed they're infusing outside of just the guys I just mentioned offensively. It could be that, let's say it's November of 2021. You look back a year prior, and the biggest question was, is Jim Harbaugh going to be here next year? Well, it could be that in November of this year, 2021, a year later, you're looking forward and you're saying, man, who would have thought that not only are we not talking about job security, we're talking about Michigan being a fringe Big Ten title contender, and if nothing else, we're looking forward to 2022 and saying, boy, this team, they're good already. They're just scratching the surface. That's the kind of stuff that you have to put in motion. And to put it in motion, you have to do it yesterday, National Signing Day. That's when you have to do it. And they took really good steps in doing that. They finished in the top 10. That's a really good thing. It's a really good start for Michigan, because it wasn't just that they went out and signed a lot of like safeties and linebackers and just loaded their class, but they didn't address needs. They addressed a ton of needs. So, I can still remain somewhat skeptical, but also be extremely hopeful, because that's where I am with Michigan at the present moment. And we'll stay in the Big Ten, just kind of skipping around here. Again, I'm not going in any particular order. Ohio State, obviously in the spring, it looked like they were going to not only be the number one class in this cycle, but they may be the one we were talking about contending for having the number one class of all time. And only by that metric could you label this class a disappointment, because it is an incredible class. They're finishing number 2. They are certainly by far the number one class in the Big Ten and have been for quite a while now. So there are difference makers up and down this entire commit list, but I'll tell you what stood out to me really more than any one player, and trust me, I could spend an hour individualing these players. We had Ryan Day on the show, and he was nice enough to join us for a few minutes yesterday. That entire replay, by the way, is on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. So in its entirety, you can watch that. So I asked Ryan Day the same question I've asked a few coaches. How did the differences in the way you had to go about recruiting in this cycle with Zoom instead of in-person communication and whatnot, how did that impact the class? So he took it a different direction than I thought. Number one, he took it the direction of, I think it probably in ways made this class closer than ever, even though you would think the distance would create more separation. He said it had the opposite impact. But then Ryan Day also said, you know, we've learned at Ohio State that you got to be, and in this particular era with Zoom and whatnot, you have to be as brutally honest as you can with guys. It's kind of the Nick Saban approach. We've heard him talk about this several times. It's no coincidence all these elite coaches at elite programs keep saying the same thing. Ryan Day said, we cannot rely on just talking guys into coming to our program anymore. It's not the way it works. Now, I'm going to paraphrase, but here's what he's actually saying. We're too loaded. Our roster is too loaded. We can't just talk kids into coming here. In other words, you can't just dangle a piece of candy in front of them and then they get here and they see how loaded the receiver room is or loaded the linebacker room is and expect them to just say, oh, okay, you know, I'll sit for 2 or 3 years if I have to. That's not the way it works. You got to be honest with them up front. You got to tell them you're going to have to fight your you-know-what off every day in practice to ever even get on the field here. And if that doesn't appeal to you, just like we talked about with Alabama last week, if that doesn't appeal to you, then Ohio State may not be the place for you. And he's right. He said you got to be authentic with them, but you got to present the actual picture and then let them decide if that's a picture they want to be a part of. And if they don't, that's fine. Ohio State's not for everybody. And more, the filter is becoming more refined as to what makes it through in terms of a recruiting prospect. But the ones that are left, because, see, if you take that process, you're going to miss out on some really good players. But what the process is designed to do is make sure that all the players that make it through that filter, that you very rarely miss on them. And that's why you don't really see a whole lot of off-field issues anymore at Alabama. You're not really seeing a ton of off-field issues at Ohio State. Doesn't that fly in the face of what conventional wisdom used to be? I remember back in the day, back in the 90s, when I was kind of growing up and I would listen to the older folks talk, they would say, it was kind of a joke. No one would ever say this publicly, but everyone would joke, you know that you're getting close to having a really good program when you start seeing some players get arrested. Okay? Now, it was very crude, but it was basically a way to say, you've got to have a certain caliber of athlete on campus, and with that caliber athlete, it was just assumed you have to take the risk off the field. They're going to get in some trouble, but they're also going to win for you. Do you notice how that's been turned on its ear? Essentially, what major programs have done, Clemson is the same way. They don't have a ton of off-field issues. I'm not saying there's never a blip on the radar screen, but you used to think that you had to pay a price to have high-caliber athletes on campus. Well, what has been discovered is, number one, I think with the proliferation of social media, players at a young age are now aware they can't make a false move. Everything is seen. So I think guys from the time they're 12 years old understand that, but there are also enough elite athletes out there that are not bad character guys to where it's possible to load a class up like Ohio State did yesterday and not have to stay up late at night checking your phone every 5 minutes if you're Ryan Day just waiting for that text. Oh, who do we got to go bail out? Oh, who are we going to have to suspend for 2 weeks? That's not the way they operate. And if you stop to think about that for a second, that in and of itself is really incredible. So those are some of the programs that I was really impressed with. Obviously, I didn't hit them all. I could go 30 minutes on North Carolina right now. Look at there. If you want to have some fun, go pull up 247sports.com. In fact, I'm going to do it for you right now as we wrap this up. Go to 247sports.com, go to the team recruiting rankings, and then go to North Carolina's class and ask yourself, as I was talking about Oregon having to go out of state constantly for their players, and I mentioned North Carolina, this is the total opposite. I'm going to read you North Carolina's highest rated commits. I'm just going to go in order, and I'm going to read their location. Okay? So let's just start down the list. I'm not going to mention names. North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina. North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina, South Carolina, South Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, North Carolina, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia. Did you notice a theme? I think there was one there. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I noticed a theme. So the point is there are many different ways to skin the old cat in recruiting because Oregon and North Carolina both finished top 15, and that's about all that their classes have in common.